My girlfriend told me, I need space to focus on myself right now. I replied, take it. Then I used that same space to move on completely. Months later, she came back expecting things to resume, but found out nothing was left. I need space to focus on myself right now. She said it the way people say it when they've rehearsed it 6 times in the mirror and still can't make it sound kind. I remember staring at her. Not in shock. Not in devastation. Just staring. The kind of stare where your brain is running 3 seconds behind your ears, catching up on what just got said. We were sitting in my apartment in Midtown. Soraya had her jacket on already. That was the thing I noticed first, before the words even landed. She had her jacket on, her bag on her lap, like she'd come over already knowing she was leaving. You understand, right? She added, quieter. And I remember thinking, yeah, I actually do understand. More than you think. I didn't say that out loud. I said 2 words instead, and those 2 words did something to the next 7 months of our lives that neither of us saw coming. I said, take it. She blinked. Just take it, I said again, and I think I even nodded slightly. She looked at me like she expected more. A fight. Tears. Some version of begging. What she didn't expect was the calm. What she definitely didn't expect was what happened while she had her space. Because here's what nobody tells you about giving someone what they ask for. Sometimes, in the act of letting them go, you accidentally free yourself too. And sometimes that freedom hits so different that when they come back, and Soraya did come back, there's just nothing left to return to. I didn't know that the night she walked out. I didn't know it for a while. But that moment, that quiet, unjudged, unremarkable Tuesday night in October, that was the moment everything changed. Let me be honest with you before I go further. I loved Soraya. Actually loved her. Not the kind of love that's just habit and proximity and the fear of starting over. The real kind. The kind where you catch yourself smiling at your phone while she's texting you about something totally mundane like grocery lists or bad subway delays. We'd been together for 2 years and 4 months. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 29. She was 27. We met at a gallery opening in Chelsea that neither of us actually wanted to attend. Mutual friend, bad free wine, and a shared look across the room that said we both felt out of place. That was the beginning. And for a long time, that shared out-of-placeness was exactly what kept us close. She was a graphic designer with a freelance setup that stressed her out constantly. I worked in urban development consulting, the kind of job where you spend a lot of time in meetings arguing about the future of neighborhoods, while neighborhoods quietly change anyway. We didn't live together. That was intentional. My idea, actually, because I'd made the mistake of moving in with someone before and watching a good relationship get slowly strangled by shared bathroom schedules and money conversations we weren't ready for. But we spent 4 or 5 nights a week together. We had rhythms. Saturday morning coffee at the same corner place in Gramercy. Sunday evening phone calls when one of us had plans. A standing dinner reservation at a small Italian spot on the 3rd Friday of every month, because we'd had our first real date there and both agreed it was too good a ritual to abandon. And I want to be clear, I had things to lose. Real things. Not just a girlfriend. A whole version of my life I'd built around someone. So when Soraya sat on my couch with her jacket already on and her bag in her lap and said she needed space, I wasn't casual about it. I just didn't let her see what it cost. I didn't realize it then, but that calm I showed her was the first domino. Everything else fell from there. We were 2 years and 4 months in. 29 and 27. Midtown apartment, Gramercy rituals, Chelsea gallery opening origin story. That's the setup. That's all you need. Because this story isn't really about how we started. It's about how I ended. I want to say the breakup, or whatever you want to call it, because she never technically used that word, came out of nowhere. But that would be a lie. There had been signs. The way she'd started going quiet after we'd been together all evening, like spending time with me, was something that needed recovering from. The way she'd started deflecting every conversation about the future with, I don't know, I'm still figuring things out. The way she'd canceled on me twice in September, both times with reasons that were technically valid but felt thin. And there was a moment, about 3 weeks before the space conversation, that I keep coming back to. We were walking through Prospect Park on a Sunday afternoon. Good weather. No plans, nowhere to be. And she said something I filed away in the back of my head without really unpacking it. She said, "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's timeline?" I thought she was talking abstractly. About career stuff, maybe. She'd been stressed about a project pitch. I said something vague and reassuring, and she nodded and changed the subject. But I should have asked her what she meant. I should have pulled at that thread. I didn't. And 3 weeks later, she was on my couch with her jacket on, telling me she needed space to focus on herself. Looking back, that walk in Prospect Park wasn't abstract at all. She was already writing the exit before she said it out loud. I said, "Take it." And she took it. She texted me the next morning, just once, to say she appreciated how I handled it, and that she hoped we could stay in touch. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of something more instinctive. A kind of quiet self-preservation I hadn't known I had. I remember putting my phone down after reading that text and just sitting with it for a few minutes. And then, and this is the part that surprised me most, I made coffee. Just made coffee. Not because I wasn't hurting. I was. But something in the way she'd handled the whole thing. The rehearsed speech, the jacket already on, the immediate next morning text to keep the emotional temperature manageable. Something in all of that had shifted how I felt about the grief. Like the grief was still there, but the weight of it was different. It wasn't the crushing, desperate kind. It was the clear kind. The kind that doesn't beg. I called my friend Carrick that same morning. Carrick and I had been close since college. He was one of those people who listened without filling every silence. I told him what happened. He didn't say much for a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do with the time?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened exactly?" Just, "What are you going to do with the time?" I told him I didn't know yet. He said, "Figure it out. That's the whole job right now." That was the first week. It didn't feel like anything important, but it was. The first 2 weeks were uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. It was the absence of habit. I kept almost texting her. Not because I missed her specifically in those moments, but because I trained myself to share small things with her. A frustrating meeting. A funny overheard conversation on the subway. A song that came on while I was cooking dinner. These tiny daily dispatches had somewhere to go for 2 years. Now they didn't. So they just sat with me. And eventually I started noticing them differently. Started noticing the texture of my own days without the habit of narrating them to someone else. It was strange at first. Then it became something I didn't have a word for. Not lonely. Not free. Just present. Around the 3rd week, I started running again. Not obsessively. Just 3 mornings a week, early, before work, through the east side of the park. I'd stopped running when Soraya and I got serious because mornings became something we shared and solo runs felt like time I was taking from us. I hadn't noticed that until I started again and realized how much I'd missed it. The 4th week, Carrick called me and asked if I wanted to come to a dinner party his girlfriend Linnea was putting together. A small group. 6 or 7 people. I almost said no. The old version of me, the version still waiting for Soraya to say she'd made a mistake, would have said no. Instead I said yes. And I want to be clear, I did not go to that dinner party looking for anything. I genuinely just went because I was tired of spending Friday evenings in my apartment running mental replays of the last few months of a relationship that was over. But that dinner party is where I met Alara. Before I tell you about Alara, I need you to understand one thing. I was not over Soraya. Not at that point. Not cleanly. I still thought about her. Still occasionally checked her Instagram before catching myself and putting my phone down. Still had moments where something would happen, something good or strange or funny, and my first thought would be, I should tell her. I was not over her, but I was done waiting. And those are different things. Alara was a friend of Linnea's from her graduate program. She was an urban ecologist, which, given what I did for work, led to an immediate conversation that neither of us was trying to have, but neither of us could stop. She was sharp. Not sharp in the polished, careful way where you can feel someone performing intelligence. Sharp like someone who'd actually thought about things hard and had opinions that came from somewhere real. We talked for most of the dinner. Not romantically. Not like people who are trying to figure out if they're attracted to each other. Just like 2 people who had accidentally found something worth saying. She left with Linnea's group. I left with Carrick. On the walk back, he looked at me sideways and said, "That was interesting." "It was just a conversation," I said. He shrugged. Sometimes just a conversation is the most interesting thing that can happen to a person. I didn't push it, but I thought about what he said on the walk home. And I thought about it again that night before I fell asleep. I didn't text Soraya that week. I hadn't for 3 weeks. But that was the first week I didn't think about texting her. 6 weeks after the space conversation, Soraya texted me. Not the casual, staying in touch tone of the first message. Something warmer. She said she'd been thinking about me and asked how I was doing. She used a word, genuinely, the way people do when they're aware that what they're saying might not be believed without it. I genuinely miss talking to you. I read it twice, put my phone face down, picked it up, read it a third time, and then I did something I wouldn't have predicted 6 weeks earlier. I didn't respond right away, not as a tactic, not as some calculated power move. I just didn't know what I wanted to say yet. And for the first time in 2 years, I was willing to sit with not knowing instead of rushing to manage her feelings. I thought about the jacket she'd had on, the bag in her lap, the text the next morning designed to keep things comfortable. And I thought about Alara, not in a comparison way, just the fact of her, the conversation, the sharpness, the ease. I texted Soraya back the next evening. I'm good. Hope you are too. Clean. Warm enough. Nothing that could be pulled on. She replied with 3 sentences that were clearly designed to open a door. I walked past that door and kept walking. Carrick texted me a few days later. Said Linnea was having people over again, smaller this time. Specifically mentioned that Alara was coming. Specifically mentioned. I showed up. This time Alara and I had a real conversation. Not about urban ecology or development consulting. About the kind of stuff people don't usually talk about at dinner parties. What we'd been wrong about. What we'd changed our minds on. How we both felt about the specific anxiety of being in your late 20s and realizing that the choices you make now are starting to actually be your life and not just a rehearsal for it. At one point she said something that caught me completely off guard. She said, I think most people are terrified of their own space. Like they ask for it, but then they immediately try to fill it with something just to prove they were handling it fine. She wasn't talking about me. She was talking about something in her own life, some context I didn't have. But I heard it in my chest. Because that's what I'd been doing. Not filling the space. Actually sitting in it. Actually letting it be space instead of a waiting room. I didn't tell her that. But something shifted. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night. Not because of any move. Just because we both seemed to arrive at the obvious conclusion at the same time. We should talk more, she said. We should, I said. That was that. Let me tell you what October and November looked like from the outside. I ran 3 mornings a week. I took on a project at work that I'd been hesitating on because it was high stakes and high visibility, and the old, distracted version of me hadn't felt ready for it. I slept better. I cooked dinner at home more nights than I ate out. I read 3 books in 6 weeks, actual cover-to-cover reading, which I hadn't done in over a year. And 2 or 3 times a week, I talked to Alara. Sometimes in person. Sometimes on the phone for an hour and a half that felt like 20 minutes. It didn't rush. It didn't perform. It was just 2 people who found they had a lot to say to each other and no pressure to say it all at once. Meanwhile, on the other track, Soraya texted me twice more. Once in late October. Once in mid-November. Both times warmer than the last. Both times leaving the kind of open space that's meant to be filled. Both times, I replied briefly. Not coldly. Not with walls up. Just briefly. Like someone who had somewhere to be. Which, for the first time in a while, I actually did. I want to stop the timeline here for a second. Because there was something I didn't know during those 2 months. Something I only found out later, and when I found it out, it reframed everything. About a month after our conversation, after the jacket and the bag and the space request, a mutual friend of ours, a woman named Callista, who'd known us both separately before we were a couple, told me something over coffee. She didn't set it up. Didn't warn me it was coming. Just mentioned it in the middle of talking about something else. The way devastating information sometimes arrives, casually, embedded in something ordinary. She said, I saw Soraya at that rooftop thing in Williamsburg 2 weekends ago. She seemed good. Was with a group. Good, I said. Yeah. A pause. She was with Tennyson. I knew who Tennyson was. He was someone Soraya had mentioned a few times. A photographer. Someone she'd collaborated with professionally. She'd mentioned him neutrally enough that I hadn't flagged it. Now, sitting across from Callista at a coffee shop on a Wednesday afternoon, I felt the neutrality of that reassessment land hard. I kept my face composed. Rooftop thing, I said. Fun. Callista looked at me in a way that said she was watching for something. You didn't know? She said. Know what exactly? I said. And she told me. Here's what Callista told me. Tennyson had not been neutral. Not to Soraya, not for a while. They'd met through work 8 months ago, 4 months before the space conversation, and according to what Callista knew through her own overlapping social circles, The two of them had been increasingly close for a while before Soraya asked me for space. Not confirmed cheating. That's not what I'm saying. But the thing Soraya had called needing space to focus on herself was at least partially about needing space to figure out what she was feeling about someone else. I sat with that information for a long time. Callista was quiet while I sat with it. Eventually I said, "Does she know you told me?" "No," Callista said. "Okay. Are you?" "I'm good," I said. "And the strange thing?" I meant it. Not in a numb way. In an actual way. Because here's what the information did and didn't do. It didn't make me hate Soraya. She hadn't technically lied. I need space to focus on myself might have been incomplete, but it wasn't a fabrication. What it did was remove any remaining ambiguity I had about where things stood. Any quiet part of me that had been wondering if maybe she was coming back, if maybe the space was genuinely temporary and resolvable. That quiet part finally went quiet for a different reason. She hadn't come to me because she was confused or overwhelmed or needed room to breathe. She came to me because she was already looking toward a door marked with someone else's name. And I had let her walk right through mine. Here's what changed. Nothing, visibly. And everything, internally. I didn't call Soraya. Didn't send some long message finally saying what I'd been thinking. Didn't make a scene. Didn't post anything cryptic online. What I did was close the last window I hadn't fully closed. That quiet background channel. The one where part of me was still tracking her texts, still clocking the warmth of them, still noting the frequency. That closed. Not with drama. Just quietly, like a tab you no longer need open. And with that window closed, everything else had more room. The work project. The running. The books. Ilera. That same week, Ilera and I had our first actual date. Not a dinner party or a group thing. Just us. A small wine bar in the West Village that she'd been wanting to try. 3 hours. We closed the place down. And I remember walking to the subway afterward thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not the high voltage, uncertain, managing someone else's anxiety feeling I'd spent the last year of my relationship trying to navigate. This. Two people who actually wanted to be there. Who weren't performing ease, but actually felt it. December was the month things solidified in both directions. Ilera and I became something real. Not labeled. Not announced. Just real in the way things are when two people have been honest with each other from the start and neither of them has a hidden agenda. She met Carrick. I met her friend group. I cooked dinner for her at my apartment on a Thursday night, and she stayed, and we talked until 2 in the morning, and it was the most naturally I'd spent time with someone in longer than I wanted to admit. And simultaneously, in December, Soraya's texts changed. More frequent. More specific. She mentioned missing our Italian place. She mentioned a song we used to listen to. She said she'd been thinking about us. That was the word she used. Us. And that she thought she'd made a mistake asking for space the way she did. I read all of those. Every one. I didn't respond the way she wanted me to. I responded warmly, briefly, without pulling on anything she was offering. I didn't tell her about Ilera. Not because I was hiding it, but because it wasn't her information to have. Soraya and I were not together. We were not in a conversation about being together. My life, as it had developed in the 2 months since she'd asked for space, was not something she had a claim on. Christmas week. I was at my apartment packing to go to my family's place for a few days. My phone rang. Soraya. Not a text. A call. I paused for a second. Then I answered. Hey, she said. Hey. I wasn't sure if you'd pick up. I almost didn't, I said. Which was honest. A pause. I miss you, she said. Just that. Like she'd saved it up and needed to put it somewhere. I was quiet for a moment. I think I know that, I said. Can we talk? Actually talk. We're talking. I mean in person. Can I come over? Or can we meet somewhere? And here's the moment I'd been sort of dreading and sort of waiting for. Because I knew what she wanted from that meeting. She wanted to step back through the door. She wanted the Italian restaurant and the Saturday morning coffee and the Sunday evening calls and all of it. She wanted the life she'd walked away from, back again, as if the walking away hadn't happened. As if the months in between weren't months she'd spent somewhere else. As if I hadn't spent those same months becoming someone who no longer needed her to come back. I don't think that's a good idea, I said. Silence. What do you mean? I mean, I think things have changed. What's changed? And I had a choice in that moment. I could explain. I could be thorough. I could give her the full articulation of everything I'd figured out in the last 2 months. Or I could be honest and brief. I chose honest and brief. A lot, I said. She pushed. Soraya wasn't someone who let ambiguity stand when she felt she deserved clarity. And honestly, she did deserve clarity. She called me back 20 minutes later, and I picked up again. "I need to understand," she said. Her voice was different now. The careful, warm tone was gone. This was the real one. "You said things have changed." "Things changed how? Did something happen?" I sat down on the edge of my couch. "I think what happened is I took the space you asked for." "What does that mean?" "It means I didn't put my life on pause waiting for you to come back. I kept moving." A long pause. "Are you with someone?" I could have deflected, but I decided a long time ago that I didn't want to be the kind of person who handled difficult conversations through deflection. "Yes," I said. The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones before it. This one was dense, like she was trying to locate herself inside the information. "How long?" she finally asked. "A few months." "A few months." She repeated it like she was testing how it sounded. "So right after I asked for space." "Not right after, but while I was gone." "You asked to be gone," I said. Not harshly, just accurately. Another pause. "I didn't think you'd actually," she started. "Move on." "I didn't think it would be. I didn't think things would change like this." And I want to be careful here, because I want to be fair to her. She wasn't being malicious. She wasn't being manipulative in this moment. She was genuinely surprised. But that surprise told me everything. She'd asked for space while assuming I'd be standing in the same spot when she turned back around. She'd had her months, her Tennyson situation, whatever it had been, whatever it had or hadn't become, and she'd expected my months to be a holding pattern. Like my life was a draft she could come back and revise. "I think you believed I'd be exactly where you left me," I said. She didn't answer. "And I understand that," I continued. "Because up until you asked for that space, I probably would have been. But I wasn't. And I'm not. So that's it." Her voice cracked slightly at the end of that. "I think so," I said. "Just like that." "Not just like that. You asked for space. I gave it to you. I just didn't waste mine." The call with Soraya ended quietly. No big dramatic finish. No door slamming, accusation trading blowout. Just two people acknowledging that the gap between them had grown wider than either of them had planned for, and one of them had stopped planning to close it. A short one. She said she was sorry for how she'd handled things. That she thought she'd needed something and realized too late that she'd had it. I read it sitting at my kitchen table in the morning, holding my coffee with both hands. And I felt something. Not triumph. Not relief. Something closer to sadness, actually. Not for me. For the version of us that had been real once. The gallery opening. The bad free wine. The shared out-of-placeness. That had been genuine. I believe that. I texted back. "I appreciate you saying that. I really do. Take care of yourself, Soraya." And that was the last time I used her name in a message. I want to be clear about something. Alara didn't know the full shape of the Soraya situation for a while. She knew I'd come out of a relationship. She knew it had ended a few months before we started seeing each other. She didn't know about the December call. She didn't know about the January text. Not because I was keeping secrets, but because the timing never felt right, and because part of me wasn't sure if it was relevant information or just emotional leftover. It came up in February. We'd been spending a Sunday afternoon at her apartment. She had work spread across her coffee table, research materials, printed maps, the kind of organized chaos that becomes recognizable as someone's process. I was reading. We'd been doing that thing where you're in the same space, not talking, and it's comfortable, which is its own form of intimacy that you only achieve with people you're actually at ease with. She looked up at some point and said, without any specific lead-in, "You still think about her sometimes?" I looked up. "Is that a question?" I asked. "No," she said. "Just that." I put my book down. "I think about the relationship," I said carefully. "The way you think about anything that was real and then wasn't. But no, I'm not still in it." She nodded slowly. "She came back, didn't she?" Alara said. I looked at her. "How did you know?" She shrugged. "You just seemed like someone who'd had to make a decision recently. Not about me. A different one." She was right. I told her about the December call. About January. About what Callista had told me. About all of it. She listened the way she always listened. Fully, without filling the pauses. When I finished, she said, "Did you need to tell me that?" "I wanted to," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Okay," she said, and went back to her work. And I loved that. More than any other possible response, I loved the fact that she just went back to her work. The first year was full of the kind of small discoveries that make new relationships feel like finding a whole new continent. Her specific laugh, the involuntary one that happened when something caught her off guard, which was different from the polished, social one. The way she thought about design, not just visually, but spatially, like she was always thinking about how humans move through space and what that means. Her taste in food, her genuine curiosity, these were real things. But somewhere in the second year, the relationship had started requiring more management than connection. And I'd been the primary manager. I'd been the one smoothing things over when she was anxious about work. The one recalibrating plans when her mood shifted. The one making sure the emotional temperature stayed comfortable enough that she didn't get overwhelmed. Not because she was a bad person, but because that was the dynamic we'd fallen into without either of us naming it. She needed steadiness. I provided it. And somewhere in providing it, I'd stopped being a person who had his own needs in the relationship and started being more like a structure she leaned on. That's not love. That's load-bearing. And the thing about being load-bearing for someone is that when they leave, the initial relief is confusing. Because it shouldn't feel like relief, should it? If you love someone, their leaving should be devastating. Not a complicated mix of grief and a strange structural lightness. The jacket on before she spoke. The morning text to manage my response. I need space to focus on myself, without a single question about how I was doing in return. None of that was new. It was just suddenly visible. Like a room you've been standing in for 2 years and only just noticed has no windows. I've thought about why I said take it instead of what I would have said a year earlier. A year earlier, I would have asked what I'd done wrong. I would have asked if there was something we could fix. I would have asked what focusing on herself meant and whether that could include me and whether there was a timeline. I would have negotiated. Not out of weakness, out of a belief that relationships are worth saving, which is a valid belief. But there's a difference between saving something and dismantling yourself to keep something from ending. I'd spent a year doing the second thing while believing I was doing the first. And when she sat on my couch with her jacket already on, some part of me, the part that had been quietly paying attention all along, just finally said, no. Not dramatically, not in anger, just no. No to the negotiation. No to the waiting. No to the version of myself who would put his whole life in a holding pattern for someone who was already halfway out the door. Take it was the cleanest way I knew to say all of that in 2 words. And I meant every syllable. By March, things were clear. Soraya and I were done. Not bitterly. Not with resentment. Done in the way things are done when there's clarity on both sides about what was, what happened, and what isn't anymore. Alara and I were something I didn't have an easy word for yet. But the lack of word didn't bother me the way it would have before. Before, I needed the label. The official status. The defined thing I could point to and say, this is what I have. This is what I'm building. With Alara, I just had what I had. And what I had was real. The work project I'd taken on had gone well. Better than well. It had led to an opportunity that changed the trajectory of what I was doing professionally in a way I hadn't expected. I was running 4 mornings a week now instead of 3. I'd signed up for a half marathon in the spring, which Carrick thought was hilarious because I'd previously described running races as something other people did. I'd had breakfast at a new place in my neighborhood, not the Gramercy Corner spot, a different one, mine now, every Saturday for 2 months. I had a life I recognized as mine, not a life I was living around someone else's needs, just mine. One evening in early March, I was walking back from meeting Carrick and Linnea for dinner. The weather had started to turn. That first hint of warmth that New York gets in early spring. Not full warmth yet, but enough to take the edge off the wind and make the streets feel slightly more alive. I had my hands in my jacket pockets. Music in my headphones. No particular destination, just walking in the direction of home. And I had this moment. One of those moments that doesn't announce itself, but you feel it completely. I was just walking, and I realized I was happy. Not ecstatically happy. Not performed happy. Just quietly, cleanly happy. The way you feel when you're somewhere you're supposed to be. I thought about October. The couch. The jacket. The bag in her lap. I need space to focus on myself right now. And me, sitting there, saying 2 words that turned out to be the most self-respecting thing I'd said in over a year. Take it. I'd taken it too. That was the thing Soraya hadn't calculated for. When she asked for space, she was claiming the space for herself. But space doesn't work that way. You can't claim it exclusively. When she stepped back, the space opened up for both of us. She just assumed I'd spend mine waiting for her to decide she wanted to step back in. I used mine differently. And when she came back, and she had come back, she found a room rearranged. Different furniture. Different light. Someone already there who fit it better. Not because I'd gone out of my way to move on, but because I just refused to stay still. I told Carrick about the March walk. About the moment. About how weird it was to notice your own happiness mid-stride on a Tuesday evening. He listened. Then he said something I wrote down afterward because I wanted to keep it. He said, "Most people, when someone asks for space, treat it like a punishment. Like they've been assigned to a waiting room until the real thing starts again. You didn't do that. That's the whole story." I sat with that for a while. He was right. That was the whole story. Not the drama of the December call. Not the Tennyson revelation. Not even Alara, though she'd become something I was genuinely grateful for. The whole story was what I did with the waiting room. I walked out of it. I don't want to end this by making Soraya a villain. She wasn't. She was a person who handled a complicated situation imperfectly, who wanted something she couldn't quite name and reached for it in a way that cost her something she didn't fully value until it was gone. I've done versions of that. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't. What she underestimated wasn't me. It was what I was capable of doing with freedom. She knew the version of me who arranged himself around her needs. She didn't know, and honestly, I didn't fully know either, what I looked like when I stopped doing that. Turns out I looked like someone who woke up early and ran and did hard work and ate dinner he cooked himself and had long conversations with a woman who made him think and laughed at the right moments and never needed him to be a structure she leaned on. Turns out I looked like someone who was okay. More than okay. The last Soraya text I saved before archiving the conversation was the January one. The apology. I kept it not as a trophy, not as evidence of something, but as a reminder of what happens when you actually give someone what they ask for, completely and without condition. And then give yourself the same. She asked for space. I gave her the space. Then I built a whole life inside of mine.